with pairing assignment came through official channels, which was the first indication that something had gone wrong somewhere in the administrative process. Lieutenant Commander Vara of the Velthari Dominion had served 307 years in active military capacity, had participated in 41 distinct conflict engagements across 19 star systems, had trained under commanders whose names appeared in the foundational texts of compact military doctrine, and had accumulated a service record that the Dominion's Assessment Division classified, with characteristic understatement, as distinguished. She had been assigned partners before. The assignments had always reflected her standing: experienced officers, decorated veterans, individuals whose records bore some reasonable relationship to her own. The file the assignment system sent her on the morning of the Nexus Outpost Gamma security detail contained a photograph, a service record of 14 months, and a skill assessment that listed, under special qualifications, the following: self-taught mechanical repair, basic field medicine, improvised tactical solutions. The notation at the bottom of the special qualifications field read, "See attached supplementary documentation." The supplementary documentation was a list of online tutorial series the individual had completed. Vara read the file 3 times. Then she contacted the assignment office. "There has been an error," she said. "The assignment is correct, Lieutenant Commander," said the administrative officer, with the tone of someone who had been receiving similar calls all morning. "Specialist Cross was specifically requested for the Nexus Outpost detail by the Outpost Commander." "Specialist Cross has 14 months of service." "Yes, and his primary listed qualifications include tutorial-based mechanical training." "Yes." "I have 307 years of active service." "Yes, Lieutenant Commander," said the administrative officer. "The Outpost Commander is aware of your record. The request was specific." Vara ended the communication and looked at the file photograph. A human male, early 30s by human reckoning, with the specific expression of someone who had been told to look professional for an official photograph and had achieved something approximately adjacent to it. Brown eyes, slightly untidy hair, a uniform that fit correctly but wore as though he wasn't entirely used to it yet. She reported to Nexus Outpost Gamma the following morning with the particular quality of controlled patience that 3 centuries of military service had refined into something that looked, from the outside, almost like equanimity. Eli Cross was in the maintenance bay when she arrived, which was where he spent most of his time when not on active assignment, because the maintenance bay contained problems that had solutions, and he found this preferable to situations that didn't. He was working on a targeting calibration unit with the focused attention of someone who had learned to do this from a 47-minute video, and was now doing it in a situation where errors had consequences, which concentrated the mind considerably. He heard her come in. He did not look up immediately because the calibration required both hands and the attention of someone who had not actually done this before in a real-world setting and was relying on the accuracy of his mental model of the process. "Specialist Cross," said a voice with the particular resonance of Velthari speech. 2 registers, slightly offset, producing something that wasn't quite either. "One moment," he said. He completed the calibration sequence, checked the output reading against the specifications, confirmed it was within tolerance, and set down the tool. Then he stood and turned. Lieutenant Commander Vara was 4 arms and 3 centuries of military service, standing in the entrance to the maintenance bay, and the expression on her silver-gray face was doing something that he would later learn to read as the Velthari equivalent of a carefully maintained neutrality that was working harder than it appeared to be. "Lieutenant Commander," he said, "I was told you'd be arriving today." "You were told correctly," she said. Her 4 white eyes moved around the maintenance bay. The tools arranged in the specific order he had learned produced the most efficient workflow. The repair logs he kept by hand because he found it helped him remember procedures. The printed reference sheets he had taped to the wall at the workstation. "You repaired the targeting calibration unit." "Recalibrated," he said. The calibration had drifted. "I ran the diagnostic sequence from the maintenance manual and adjusted the offset parameters." "You were trained in targeting calibration systems?" "I watched a series on it," he said. 47 minutes. There were 3 follow-up videos for advanced adjustments. He paused. "The manual here is good, but it assumes you already understand the underlying system architecture. The tutorial explained the architecture first, which helped." Vara looked at him for a moment. "You repaired a military targeting system from tutorial instruction." "Recalibrated," he said again. "The repair was straightforward once I understood the architecture. The difficult part was knowing which diagnostic sequence to run first." He picked up the calibration unit and held it out. The output is within the specified tolerance range. You can verify against the maintenance log if you want. She took the unit. She checked the reading. She set it down with an expression that was doing something he couldn't read yet, but that felt significant. The outpost commander requested you specifically, she said. I know, Eli said. Commander Ashford said she needed someone who could improvise. Her words were that she already had people who could follow procedures, and what she needed was someone who could solve problems that the procedures didn't cover. He paused. I'm not sure that's a compliment exactly, but I've been trying to treat it as one. You have 14 months of service, Vara said. Yes. I have 307 years. I know, he said. I read your file. He paused. I read it 4 times, actually. There's a lot to read. Something shifted in her expression. The controlled neutrality doing something different, a micro-adjustment that 3 centuries of opponents had never been positioned close enough to observe. You read my file 4 times, she said. I wanted to understand what I was working with, he said. I do that with systems I'm not familiar with. Read the documentation thoroughly before I start. He met her 4 wide eyes with the direct attention that she would later understand was not performance, but simply the way he looked at things he was trying to understand. You're considerably more complex than the targeting calibration unit. The maintenance bay was quiet for a moment. Outside, Nexus Outpost Gamma ran its continuous operations. The particular organized hum of a security installation that was functional and alert and not currently on fire, which was the baseline condition everyone on it was working to maintain. The security detail briefing is at 0800, Vara said finally. I know, Eli said. I'll be there. She left. He turned back to the workstation and picked up the next item on his repair list, which was a communications relay that had developed an intermittent fault and which he had identified a tutorial series for that morning. It was 93 minutes of video across 6 parts. He had watched the first 3 on his rest break. He pulled up part 4. The first 2 weeks of the security detail produced 17 situations that the standard protocols covered adequately, and 3 that they didn't. Vara handled the 17 with the efficiency of 3 centuries of practice. Precise, economical, resolved before most of the outpost staff were aware a situation had developed. She had a quality of operational clarity that Eli found genuinely impressive, in the specific way that you find impressive things that are so far outside your own capability that you can't even map the distance accurately. The 3 situations the protocols didn't cover were his. The first was a communications relay fault that developed during a sensor sweep, taking out the outpost's secondary alert system at a moment when the primary was running a scheduled diagnostic. The standard response was to halt the diagnostic and restore primary function, which would have taken 11 minutes. Eli bypassed both systems through a jury-rigged crosslink he had assembled from components in the maintenance bay, restoring alert coverage in 4 minutes using a configuration that was not in any manual because it had not existed before he built it. Vara watched him do this from the doorway of the communications room. She said nothing during the repair. Afterward, she said, "That configuration. It shouldn't work as well as it does," he agreed. "The impedance mismatch should create noise in the signal. It doesn't, for reasons I don't fully understand. I've been trying to figure out why." "Where did you learn the crosslink approach?" "I didn't," he said. "I looked at the 2 systems and thought about what they had in common and tried something." He paused. The tutorial series on relay architecture helped. It gave me a model of how the components relate to each other, which made it easier to see the connection that wasn't in the manual. Vara looked at the crosslink. "It shouldn't work," she said. "A lot of things I do shouldn't work," he said. "I've noticed that the shouldn't is usually about the procedure, not the physics. If the physics allows it, finding the procedure is just a matter of trying things until something works." She was quiet for a moment. "In 300 years of military service," she said, "I have not encountered that approach described as a methodology." "It's probably not a methodology," he said. "It's more of a habit." The second situation was a personnel conflict between 2 outpost staff members that had been developing for 3 weeks and had reached the point where it was affecting operational efficiency. The standard protocol was a formal mediation process that took 5 days and required documentation. Eli had a 20-minute conversation with each person separately, identified the specific miscommunication at the root of the conflict, and arranged for both of them to be in the same room with the same information at the same time. The conflict resolved itself. Vara reviewed the operational efficiency reports afterward and found the improvement. "The mediation process," she said, I didn't use the mediation process, he said. I just talked to them. The protocol requires formal documentation. The protocol is designed for conflicts that are complicated, he said. This one wasn't complicated. It was a misunderstanding that had been allowed to develop into a conflict because nobody had talked to both people at the same time. He paused. I watched a series on conflict resolution when I was on the transport here. 12 videos. The core principle was that most conflicts are information problems, not relationship problems. You fix the information, and the relationship fixes itself. Vara looked at him with the 4 white eyes that had watched 41 military engagements and 3 centuries of human and alien behavior. You resolved a personnel conflict using principles from an online tutorial series, she said. The principles were sound, he said. The tutorial didn't invent them, it just explained them clearly. She was quiet. Something was happening in her expression that he was getting better at reading. Not the controlled neutrality of the first day, something that moved underneath it when she thought he wasn't watching carefully. He was always watching carefully. It was the same habit that made him read documentation 4 times and watch tutorial follow-up videos and take notes by hand on repair procedures. The habit of paying attention to things until he understood them. He was paying attention to her. The third situation came in the 3rd week and was not a maintenance problem or a personnel issue. It was a threat assessment that Vara identified first, an anomalous sensor reading on the outpost's eastern perimeter that the automated system had classified as equipment error and which she had classified, after 11 seconds of analysis, as deliberate interference. She brought it to him because the interference pattern was in the communications architecture, and she had spent 2 weeks watching him work in the communications architecture, and she had reached a conclusion she didn't fully articulate, but which was operational rather than personal. He saw things in that architecture that she didn't. Here, she said, showing him the sensor log on a tablet. He looked at it for 40 seconds. That's not equipment error, he said. No, she said. What is it? He looked at it for another 20 seconds. Someone is testing the relay network, he said. These intervals, they're not random, they're systematic. Someone is mapping the coverage pattern, looking for gaps. He looked up. They've been doing it for 6 days. The automated system flagged 3 of the earlier instances as equipment error too. Vara had reached the same conclusion through a different analytical path. She had reached it in 3 minutes. He had reached it in 60 seconds from a standing start. The gap they're mapping, she said. Section 7, Eastern Array, he said. The crosslink I built after the relay fault. It works, but the signal is slightly uneven. There's a narrow window where coverage is thinner than the system registers it as being. He paused. I didn't document that because I didn't fully understand why it was happening. That was a mistake. Can you close the gap? I need to understand why it's there first, he said. Otherwise, I'll close the symptom and miss the cause. He was already moving toward the maintenance bay. Give me 2 hours. She gave him 90 minutes because she had learned in 3 weeks that his time estimates were conservative and his actual performance was faster than he projected, and because the pattern suggested the systematic mapping would complete within 4 hours, and she wanted the gap closed before it did. He closed it in 83 minutes. She reviewed the sensor log afterward and confirmed the coverage was even across all sections. The cause, she said. Impedance asymmetry in the crosslink, he said. I was right that the mismatch shouldn't create signal noise, but I was wrong about why it didn't. It was creating a phase offset that the system was compensating for in a way that left the narrow gap. I adjusted the compensation parameter. He paused. I should have caught it in the original repair. You built a system that worked and identified its own flaw and corrected it, Vara said. Eventually, he said. In 300 years, she said, I have worked with many engineers. None of them would have used the word eventually in that context as a criticism of their own performance. He looked at her. It took 83 minutes, and I nearly left a security gap in an active installation, he said. That seems worth noting. The expression that moved underneath her controlled neutrality did something that he had been trying to name for 3 weeks. It wasn't approval exactly. It was something more specific. The particular quality of attention that develops when something keeps surprising you in a consistent direction, and you've started to anticipate the surprise without losing the genuine quality of it. The briefing for the Eastern Perimeter response is in 40 minutes, she said. I'll be there, he said. She left. He stayed at the workstation and wrote up the impedance asymmetry documentation that he should have written 3 weeks ago, because if something was worth knowing, it was worth recording, and because 3 centuries of someone else's experience watching him work had made him notice the gaps in his own practice more clearly than 14 months of working alone had managed. He wrote it carefully. 4 pages, diagrams included. Then he went to the briefing. The threat resolved itself on day 26, which was not how Vara had expected it to resolve. The systematic mapping of the eastern perimeter had been conducted by a Dracovari intelligence unit. 3 operatives working in rotation, patient and methodical, building a picture of the outpost coverage architecture over 4 weeks with the particular discipline of professionals who understood that good intelligence required time. They had identified the original gap. They had not identified the correction. When they moved on day 26, they moved through the section they believed was thin and found it wasn't. The alert system flagged the intrusion at 0340. Vara was at the security station in 11 seconds. Eli was there in 14, still pulling on his jacket, which was a response time that should not have been possible from his quarters, given the distance, and which she noted without comment. Eastern perimeter, section 7, she said. I know, he said. He was already at the sensor console. 3 heat signatures, moving in the pattern I'd expect if they thought section 7 was still thin. They're about to realize it isn't. When they realize it, they'll move to an alternate exit, she said. Yes, he said. The alternate is section 12, which has genuine coverage variation. Not a gap, but a response time differential of about 4 seconds. He looked at her. If we position at section 12 before they reach it, the 4 seconds doesn't matter. Section 12 is 200 meters, she said. 180, he said. I measured the outpost last week. She had also measured the outpost on her second day because she measured all installations she was assigned to. She had not told him this. Why did you measure it? She asked. For exactly this kind of situation, he said. When things move fast, knowing the distances matters. He paused. There was a video on tactical positioning I watched on the transport. The first principle was that terrain knowledge is preparation, not luck. She looked at him for exactly 1 second. The specific duration of a decision made quickly in a situation that didn't allow for longer. Section 12, she said. Now. They moved. 180 meters in the dark of a security installation at 0340, and what Vara noticed in those 90 seconds was something she had been accumulating data on for 26 days without quite assembling it into a conclusion. He moved differently than military personnel. Not worse, differently. Military training produced a specific pattern of movement under pressure. Efficient, rehearsed, following channels that had been drilled until they were automatic. He moved like someone solving a problem in real time, making micro adjustments based on what was immediately in front of him, rather than what the training said should be there. It was, she understood in those 90 seconds, the movement of someone who had learned everything he knew from documentation and applied it to reality, and kept the parts that worked and discarded the parts that didn't. There was no muscle memory. There was only current information, processed as fast as he could process it. It was an approach that should have been slower than trained reflex. In his case, for reasons she had been trying to understand for 26 days, it wasn't. They reached section 12 with 40 seconds to spare. The Dracovari operatives emerged from the perimeter exactly where the sensor data predicted. Vara handled the engagement with the efficiency of 3 centuries. 3 contacts, non-lethal, precise, contained within 40 seconds. Eli managed the communications, coordinating the backup response team with the calm of someone who had watched enough instructional content on tactical communications to know exactly what information to convey and in what order. The operatives were detained. The outpost commander was notified. The incident report was filed. Afterward, Vara stood in section 12 with the quiet that follows resolved situations and looked at Eli, who was reviewing the sensor log on his tablet with the focused attention he brought to everything, looking for the things he had done correctly and the things he would do differently. The response time differential in section 12, she said. You identified it before the incident. 3 weeks ago, he said, when I was documenting the section 7 asymmetry, I ran a full coverage analysis. Section 12 came up. I noted it but didn't flag it as a security concern because the differential was within acceptable parameters. He paused. I should have flagged it anyway. 4 seconds matters in a situation like this one. We had 40 seconds, she said. This time, he said. She looked at him. The tablet in his hands, the repair logs he kept by hand, the reference sheets on the workstation wall, the 4 readings of her file. 26 days of watching someone approach every situation as if it were a system to be understood rather than a procedure to be followed. You prepare for the situation after the situation that's in front of you, she said. He looked up. I try to, he said. I'm not always fast enough. In 300 years, she said, I have worked with officers who prepared for the situation in front of them, and officers who prepared for the situation after. The second type is rarer, she paused. The combination of both in the same person is rarer still. He held her gaze with the direct attention that she had stopped reading as naivety around day 8 and had been reading since as something more precise. The look of someone who understood that attention was a form of respect and gave it accordingly. You handled the engagement in 40 seconds, he said. 3 operatives, non-lethal, contained. I've been watching you work for 26 days and I still don't fully understand how you do what you do. 300 years, she said. It's not just time, he said. I've been thinking about it. Time builds pattern recognition and reflex, but what you have is something else. You read situations before they develop. You were moving to section 12 before I finished the sentence about the differential. He paused. How? She was quiet for a moment. It was a question no one had asked her in a long time, not because the people around her weren't capable of asking it, but because they generally assumed the answer was simply seniority and left it there. I read the space, she said. Not the immediate situation, the space. Every installation has a logic. Once you understand the logic, the next development follows from the current state the way the next line of a proof follows from the previous one. You model the system, he said. Yes. That's what I do with the documentation, he said. Read it until I understand the logic, then the specific application follows. He paused. We do the same thing through different routes. The quiet that followed was different from the first day's silence in the maintenance bay. Not the controlled neutrality of 2 people calibrating an unexpected situation, but the particular ease that develops between people who have found something in common that neither of them had expected to find. The documentation for Section 12 needs updating, she said. I'll do it tomorrow, he said. Full coverage analysis, response time differentials across all sections, flagged regardless of whether they're within acceptable parameters. He paused. And I'll show you the crosslink architecture. The documentation I wrote 3 weeks ago is accurate, but the diagrams could be clearer. I'd like to see it, she said. They walked back to the operations center through the quiet of a resolved incident, and what Vara carried with her was something she hadn't expected to carry at the beginning of a detail with a 14-month specialist who listed tutorial series under special qualifications. 307 years had taught her many things. The specific thing it had not taught her, the thing that 26 days with Eli Cross had begun to teach, was what it looked like when someone had no habits to unlearn, and therefore no reason not to try the thing that shouldn't work, and find out whether the shouldn't was about the procedure or the physics. The answer was usually the procedure. She had spent 3 centuries refining procedures. He spent his time finding out which ones were necessary. Between the 2 of them, the outpost coverage documentation would be the most accurate it had ever been by morning. She found this, unexpectedly, more satisfying than 41 military engagements across 19 star systems combined. Not because it was more important, because it was new. After 307 years, new was rarer than distinguished, and considerably more interesting.